Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another HM1 in 2021. Today we're going over NAVMEDCOM instruction 5360.1, which is the Decedent Affairs Manual. Basically, what are the procedures when someone dies, and how do we notify family and all that kind of stuff. There's only 2 chapters from this instruction that are covered on the HM1 advancement bib for September 2021. And those are Chapter 1 and Chapter 7. As usual, I have these chapters printed out in front of me, so if you hear the rustling, it's because I'm flipping through. I'm trying a new thing where I'm printing out the bibs, I'm highlighting, I'm marking them, I'm putting in little page protectors, and I'm keeping them all in a binder. So hopefully that'll help out with organization. So let's scroll down to Chapter 1. As you can see, this instruction is huge. It's several chapters. Very long. I think it's a couple hundred pages. So just focus on Chapter 1 and 7. The other stuff's good to know, but honestly, Chapter 1 and 7 is all you're getting tested on. That as well as what is in the Corpsman manual, which I'll make a separate video on because I don't have that one pulled up in front of me. So first things first, it is pronounced Decedent Affairs. It is not Decadent Affairs. I've heard a lot of people pronounce it that way. It is Decedent. Decadent, I think, has an A in it, and means something completely different. It has nothing to do with decedent. So, Decedent Affairs Program provides for search, recovery, ID, care, and disposition of remains of deceased personnel for whom the DON is responsible. So, it's DON, which is Navy and Marines, specifically our services, which kind of makes sense because it's a NAVMEDCOM instruction. Let's see. So, BUMED's in charge of it. Chief of BUMED under command of CNO is responsible with the conjunction of the commandant or commandant of the Marine Corps. One thing to really pay attention to, when you're taking the exam, CMC stands for both Command Master Chief and Commandant of the Marine Corps. So I know I've been guilty of just immediately nixing that kind of stuff because I'm like, CMC has nothing to do with it, some of these programs. But then I realized CMC is also the Commandant, not your Master Chief. So there's a couple different programs. So number 1 is the Current Death Program. Basically, somebody that dies. That's the Current Death Program. It's kind of hard to explain more than that. It's basically the standard procedure when somebody dies. Person's eligible for those services by specified statute. Talks about how the remains are shipped to a place designated by the primary next of kin for permanent disposition. This is not a part of the Current Death Program, but round-trip transportation to the burial site is authorized for family members of deceased active duty under a program administered by PERS and the CMC, again, Commandant Marine Corps. And this Current Death Program is operational on a worldwide basis during peacetime and outside areas of conflict. So current death is basically non-wartime deaths in non-war combat areas. I think the big thing to ping in on is that the round-trip transportation is not part of the Current Death Program. It's a separate program that the Commandant of the Marine Corps and ComNav, PERSCOM are the ones that take care of that. Graves registration. I like to think of graves as the search and rescue stuff. The exact way that it defines it is search, recovery, evacuation to a temporary cemetery. So let's say we're downrange and we're burying the bodies wherever we can, and we're going to have to track them down later. I like to think about those dudes that even to this day go to Vietnam and look for dog tags. That's what that search and rescue falls under. They also disposition personal effects found of the deceased and the burial of eligible deceased personnel in temporary cemeteries. So if you're thinking temporary cemetery, that should immediately ping you that the exam is looking at graves registration. So it's a grave, it's a temporary grave, graves registration. Let's see, operational details incident to graves registration are contained in the Marine Corps publication. So it's going to be established which program people under. So that's graves. So we got current death, which is pretty much the norm. Graves registration is all about the search and rescue in that temporary grave site. And the concurrent death is a combination of the first two. So it's essentially 3 different programs. You have your current death, graves, and your concurrent program. So I'll just read it off to you. It's a combination of current death and the graves registration. Can be activated during emergencies. So it starts out with that graves registration, and when everything is chilled out, it goes with the current death program. So eventually it flips into the other. And it says the concurrent return program may be either phased into the current death or graves registration as the situation dictates. So for example, we're doing the concurrent program. It's like, yeah, we're grabbing the bodies now, but we are going to go back to the current program, and then suddenly we're under mortar fire. It's something like the area is a war zone again. Yeah, we need to get out of here immediately, and it is again the graves program until it's somewhat stable, where we can initiate the concurrent program. And it says remains buried in temporary cemeteries, either an emergency or the graves registration formal program. They may be evacuated under the concurrent return program only if the conditions and capabilities permit. And it doesn't actually say who dictates that, so I would say up from the boss. Maybe that's in the Corpsman manual. And then, so the return of remains program is only activated upon enactment of special legislation. So important, special legislation, only one of these programs, special legislation, can get activated, and that's the return of remains. The return of remains program can only be activated during that special legislation. The program provides for permanent disposition of remains and for people who could not be evacuated under the concurrent death program or concurrent return program. So like, let's say that area was kind of safe but not really, so we couldn't get everybody. Return remains is this place is 100% safe, and we're able to go do a formal ops, find all the bodies, and take the time, so it's not a quick rush. Let's see. So again, I think I said 3 earlier. So there's 4 programs. So decedent affairs, think 1 current death, 2 graves registration, 3 concurrent return program, 4 return of remains. This 5th program, I think, trips a lot of people up because it's not one of the 4 programs in the decedent affairs manual, but it is in this instruction, honestly, just to confuse everybody who reads it. It specifically says the Casualty Assistant Calls program, so CACP, are not identified as part of the decedent affairs program. However, they are related. So, and that's where the CACO, that Casualty Assistant Calls Officer, gets involved with the primary kin, secondary next to kin. And that they're the ones that help the family figure out how we're going to dispose of the remains, how's the payment going to happen, and what are we going to do with that person's permanent effects. A lot of other stuff too, kind of what you'd imagine, like medical care, exchange. So really, like, the CACO is kind of like the POC for, hey, what is the military going to do for you? What benefits are you entitled to while we get your child or husband or wife? So whoever that active duty person is, their family, how can we make sure you guys are taken care of? It's already a stressful time. So that's how the military kind of helps out with anything that they can. So who does the CACP program for the Navy? It is the Naval Personnel Command. So NAVMEDCOMINST is the Navy Casualty Assistant Calls program. Marine Corps is Commandant of the Marine Corps. So just remember that it's 2 different people. The Commandant's not doing the Navy one. PERS isn't doing the Marine Corps one. Let's see. This doesn't give you any like specific timelines. I think that stuff's more in the Corpsman manual. And then Chapter 1 has a bunch of definitions, which if you're reading the, if you just read it, it'll help you kind of understand it. I think a lot of stuff is intuitive. So 48, contiguous United States, port of entry, primary next of kin. So there is a priority order for primary next of kin. So a spouse, 2 eldest child over the age of majority, 3 father or mother. So unless it's like specified in their page 2, which is why it's important to always be updating that, there is a step 1, step 2, step 3. But it does say in there that you look at their page 2. The dependency application. So that's why it's really important to have that updated, especially if like you're going deployed, you're somewhere unsafe. Just make sure that your page 2 is always updated. So then if you have like family drama, they will not they'll know how to avoid that and find out who the right family member is to talk to, regardless of who was on your stuff when you joined up. And so like low priority stuff, so like prisoners, remains of POWs or personnel missing for a long time, unremarried surviving spouse, natural adopted children, parents, remarried surviving spouse, other blood relatives, or a person in loco parentis to the decedent. Which kind of makes sense. So number 1 is the unremarried surviving spouse, because that's their spouse. 2, their kids. 3, their parents. And then 4, married spouse, and then so forth from there. Or remarried spouse. Defines dependents. I'm not going to spend too much time on that one because military folk, if you're at the HM1 level, you know what a dependent is. It gives a bunch of guidance for what they are, but I don't think there's anything in there that's super important. Yeah, I'm kind of just breezing through it. Yeah, if there's something that you think is important, please drop a comment. And then it talks about who the dependents of civilian employees may be important to know. So spouse, unmarried, legitimate or illegitimate children under the age of 21. Yeah, pretty much it. And then there's a bunch of extra info. Primary, secondary expenses. I would say this is super important to understand. It's also reiterated pretty lengthy in the Corpsman Manual chapter. So primary expenses are anything that has to do with recovering, preparing, and encasing the body. So anything to do with the body itself. So they give some examples: recovery, removal, embalming, casket, shipping container, cremation, urn, clothing, delivery of remains to common carrier terminal. So anything to do with the body itself. Secondary expenses are any expenses that have to do with the burial and the funeral. So primary is the body itself. Secondary is the funeral, burial, ceremonial stuff, to include flowers and all that. I know I saw those kind of questions a lot in like the earlier Corpsman exams. I can't remember off the top of my head if I've seen that in like the one at our level. Oh, I think my mouse is... Oh, 1 second, I gotta change it better in my mouse. Oh, no, there we go. Give me problems. Cremains, I've seen that on Blue Jacket Tier. I don't know if I've ever seen that exam. It's just such a fun word. The ashes of a cremated body. Talks about field records. These forms are important, like the DD 2063. I'll type them up and put them on there. I don't have a good way to remember forms. Typically, I just flashcard it out like the day before the exam in the areas that I think I'm most likely to see, and then I do that last. Like I think, as I said before in some of my earlier videos, like my short-term number memory, not that great. I'm good at knowing concepts, so I really have to focus on like that flashcard closer to the exam. DD 565, statement of statement of recognition of deceased. So I would say a 2063. I think there's a 2064 and a 2065 that are somewhere in this book as well. I would know those, and I would know what the 565 is. So yeah, it just kind of talks about those a little bit more. Let's see. Then DD 2063 is not completed if the deceased family member does all of the arrangements. Reason being, the 2063 is the record of preparation and disposition of remains. So like if the military is not doing it, why would you fill out that form? Let's see, 2062 and then 2065. So those are the other two. I'll type those out and I'll just memorize those. All right, and then the next part for the September 2021 bib is Chapter 7, which I don't think is nearly as long as Chapter 1. Yeah, Chapter 7 is like 3 pages, so let's down to that real quick. Chapter 7, oh, yep, see, it's 2 pages, I already pieced through it. So this one's all about cremation. Authorization. Cremation is performed subject to compliance with applicable civil regulations. So whatever is allowed in that area. It says telegram. I think that speaks to how old this I think this instruction is from like the 80s. If it's received by telegram, naval authorities will assure that a written and signed copy of that request is received before cremation. So like they need proof that someone wants to cremate. Like a sticky note saying cremate my spouse, not gonna fly. They need actual signed paperwork. Place of cremation, they prefer to do it at or near the place of death. Reason being, why transport a body if you can instead transport an urn? It's a lot smaller and lighter. However, if it's specifically requested by the next of kin, the receiving funeral director may arrange the cremation as they want. Talks about the cremation casket. Typically, it is a inexpensive wooden or other cremation casket common to the industry. So basically, this says the military ain't paying for anything fancy. It's just going to be a basic cremation casket. Then there needs to be certified stuff saying that the cremation was done, which is the 2062, which I talked about earlier, which is the record of preparation and disposition of remains, either outside CONUS or in CONUS. Is two different forms. 2023 is within CONUS. I would try to remember the difference between two because I think I've seen those as questions at some point. Just something to think about, like what do these numbers mean? Especially when it's something so close, they tend to try to trick you up. So how do remains get transported? Common carrier or funeral coach to the nearest crematory. So typically they try to get it to the near, as I said earlier, they cremation as close as the place of death, get it done as soon as possible, so then the ashes can be transported instead of the body. Final destination. The cremains, again, that's cremated remains of military personnel, will be hand carried in a suitable container. The escort gets authorized 10 pounds of additional luggage as the Decedent Affairs program. And then if an escort is not authorized, the cremains will be transported by registered mail. Preferred, but it can also do air or surface. Talks about urns, doesn't really say too much in there. Rectangular vase shape or vase style spun bronze of carrying or shipping container. It does say that an urn should be engraved to include name, grade, date of birth, date of death, and branch of service. So if you just think what would a placard have if you were looking at an urn for someone that is remains, name, grade, date of birth, date of death, branch of service, just kind of makes sense in what the military would have. Consignment. Remains are normally consigned to a designated funeral director or national cemetery. For cremains, they can actually be sent to the primary next of kin as well if they just want it directly. It does say that it needs to accept or needs to fly with civil regulations or state requirements. So like if the state says you can't do it, you can't. And that's really it. It talks about how personnel will talk to the CACO to get all that set up. Alright, that is the Decedent Affairs program. I will do another video for the chapter in the Corpsman Manual that I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know for most exams I've taken, it's a good mix of information between both here and the Corpsman Manual. So I'll do another video that focuses on that one. I think the Corpsman Manual one is a little bit more meaty than even what's normally required in this one. But that's it. Hope you guys have a good night and enjoy.